Elle thought her first day at the school would be about learning teaching and fitting in. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. In front of the entire staff, the principal humiliated her, not with words, but with a slap that echoed through the silent room. No one defended her. No one spoke up. She was just an intern after all, or so they thought. What they didn't know was that Elle wasn't just there to learn, she had a purpose, and by the time they found out who she really was, it would be far too late. The teacher's lounge buzzed with low conversations and the scraping of coffee mugs. A long table stood in the center piled with papers, empty cups, and a few half-eaten donuts. Elle stepped through the doorway clutching a worn leather notebook to her chest. She wore a plain white blouse tucked into navy blue slacks, no makeup, hair tied neatly back, a few heads turned. The room went noticeably quieter. "Who's that?" whispered a young teacher to his colleague. "New intern," the woman replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "Looks like she wandered in from a community college," Elle pretended not to hear. She moved to an empty seat at the end of the table, her every step feeling heavier under their glances. At the head of the table, Grant the principal stood flipping through a stack of papers. His dark suit was crisp, his hair perfectly in place. Authority clung to him like a second skin. When he looked up and spotted Elle, his face froze for a fraction of a second. Then he spoke loud and clipped, "You're Elle, right? Yes, sir." Elle answered, her voice steady but soft. Grant's eyes skimmed over her from the plain shoes to the modest notebook in her hands. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "We take pride in professionalism here," he said sharply, making no attempt to hide his disdain. "That includes appearances." A few teachers chuckled under their breath. Someone even coughed out the word rookie. Elle's fingers tightened around her notebook, but she kept her expression calm. Grant turned back to the group. "Let's begin. Some of us apparently have a lot to learn." The meeting started. Grant led discussions about the new semester schedule, budget cuts, and standardized testing policies. His tone was brisk, almost aggressive. He didn't invite opinions, he demanded agreement. When he asked if anyone had concerns about the proposed changes, the room stayed silent. Heads nodded. A few people scribbled notes without looking up. Ella hesitated, then raised her hand slightly. Grant's eyes narrowed. "Yes, I just think cutting creative programs entirely might hurt student engagement," Elle said carefully. "Especially for kids who don't thrive in purely academic settings." A long, tense pause. Grant set down his papers with a sharp thud. The whole room flinched. "Are you seriously questioning administrative decisions on your first day?" he said, voice rising. His smile was thin and cold. Elle opened her mouth to respond, but Grant was already moving quick, abrupt. He strode down the aisle between tables, came right up to her then. Before anyone could process what was happening, he slapped her across the face. A gasp ripped through the room. Ella stumbled back against her chair, hand flying to her cheek, eyes wide in shock. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Grant's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Consider that your first and last warning." Elle's heart pounded in her ears. She could feel every pair of eyes locked onto her, some shocked, some smug, some simply indifferent. Slowly she straightened, forcing her hand away from her cheek. "Understood, sir," she said quietly, and sat back down, her hands trembling slightly against her notebook. Grant gave a satisfied grunt and returned to his place at the front. "Let's move on," he barked. "Some of us have real work to do." The meeting dragged on, but the air had shifted. Elle kept her head low, scribbling meaningless notes just to keep her hands busy. The sting on her cheek had dulled into a throb, but the sharpness of humiliation stayed fresh, burning hotter by the second. Around her, the teachers seemed to pretend nothing had happened. Or worse, they leaned into it. During a short break, a middle-aged woman with a chunky necklace and thick perfume leaned over from across the table. "You know," she said in a syrupy voice, It's usually best for interns to stay quiet, just a tip. Elle nodded stiffly, not trusting herself to speak. From a few seats away, Mason, a math teacher with a permanent smirk plastered across his face, chimed in loudly enough for everyone to hear. Maybe next time she'll think before speaking out of turn. Right, folks? A few chuckles followed dry and biting. Grant didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His approval was written all over his smirk. Elle sat perfectly still, but inside something hardened. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Only 10 minutes left, just survive this. She gripped her notebook tighter. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. The next morning, whispers clung to the school hallways like damp mist. Elle walked into the teacher's lounge, keeping her eyes down, pretending she didn't notice the sudden hush that followed her entrance. At the coffee machine, two teachers, Linda and Chris, stood whispering behind their mugs. She actually thought she could tell Grant what to do. Linda said, a cruel amusement in her voice. Chris snorted. She's lucky all she got was a slap. Ella poured herself a cup of coffee, hands, steady heart pounding. She heard every word. Mason leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smirking like he had been waiting for her. Morning intern. He called out. His voice carried an exaggerated cheerfulness that dripped sarcasm, ready to take on the world today, or just planning to survive without getting another lesson in respect. A few quiet laughs rippled around the room. Elle didn't answer. She walked past him, keeping her face calm, though every fiber inside screamed for her to react. Smart girl, Mason muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to catch. As she sat down, a younger teacher, a woman named Jade, barely a few years older than Elle, slid into the seat next to her. You should probably apologize to Grant, Jade, whispered almost kindly. Even if you didn't mean anything. That's just how it is here. Elle looked at her, searching for any trace of irony, any hint that Jade might actually be joking. There was none. Thanks for the advice, Ella said quietly, forcing a small smile. Jade smiled back, relieved as if she'd just saved Elle's future. Elle looked around the room, the stares, the judgment, the silent verdict already passed. It didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter what she did. They had already decided who she was. She straightened her shoulders and opened her notebook, pretending to review the day's lesson plan, pretending for now. Inside, she wasn't planning apologies. She was planning something else, something they would never see coming. Later that afternoon, the faculty meeting reconvened. This time, Grant seemed even more smug, striding into the room with a swagger that set everyone on edge. Elle took her usual spot at the far end of the table, feeling the unspoken tension coil tighter. Grant cleared his throat loudly, drawing everyone's attention. Before we dive into today's agenda, he said, his voice rich with false cheer. I think it's important we remind ourselves of the importance of humility and knowing one's place. Some teachers shifted uncomfortably. Others grinned, sensing where this was going. Grant's eyes locked onto Elle. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Mason chuckled from his seat, adding with a smirk. Especially the newbies. Best to learn quick or well. We all know how lessons are delivered around here. Laughter rippled across the room, sharp cold. Ella's chest tightened, but she forced her face into a calm mask. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Grant moved closer, pretending to address the group, but keeping his eyes pinned on her. This school isn't a place for idealists or daydreamers, he said. We need people who follow, not those who imagine they know better. Silence fell. Elle spoke, her voice steady, despite the pounding in her chest. Maybe leadership isn't about demanding silence, she said quietly, but about earning respect. The room froze. Grant's smile faltered for just a second before hardening. We'll see, he said, his tone sharp enough to cut. We'll see how long idealism lasts here. The meeting moved on, but the real battle lines had already been drawn. The announcement came without warning. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the front office buzzed over the intercom. All faculty please report to the auditorium immediately. District representatives are on campus. A ripple of panic surged through the halls. Teachers abandoned their coffee cups, their copies, their half-finished conversations. Grant stormed out of his office, tie askew, face flushed. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath, pushing past staff. In the auditorium, 3 sharply dressed officials stood waiting near the stage. Clipboards, stern faces. No smiles. Grant clapped his hands once hard. "Everyone line up. Stay professional, do not speak unless spoken to," he barked. Mason leaned toward Elle, whispering, "Bet they're here to check student lunches or something dumb." Elle said nothing. Her eyes stayed on the officials, heart beating faster. One of the officials, a woman with steely gray hair, stepped forward. "We're conducting a full review of operations," she announced. "Instructional practices, financial management, and administrative conduct." Grant forced a smile, teeth bared too tightly. "Of course. Anything you need." The gray-haired woman nodded briskly. "We'll begin with classroom observations, then individual interviews." Grant visibly stiffened. He scanned the room, sizing up potential threats. His eyes paused on Elle for half a second longer than necessary. Elle met, his gaze unblinking. Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. The officials divided up. Teachers were pulled aside one by one. Notes were taken, questions were sharp. Surgical Grant paced near the back of the room, pretending to supervise but clearly unraveling. When one of the officials, a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses, called out, "Elle, could you come with me?" The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Grant's head snapped around, his fists clenched at his sides. Elle stood smoothing her slacks with slow, deliberate hands. She walked toward the officials without hesitation. As she passed Grant, she caught the low growl he couldn't quite swallow. "This isn't over." Elle didn't flinch. "No," she thought, "it's just beginning." The office they led her into was small, cold, and windowless. Elle sat across from the gray-haired woman and the tall man. A third official, a younger woman with sharp eyes, clicked a recorder on. The gray-haired woman leaned forward. "State your full name and position here." "Elle Hart, intern, Language Arts Department." Elle said steadily. The tall man scribbled something down. "Ms. Hart," the younger woman said crisply, "have you witnessed or experienced any incidents of misconduct during your time here?" A pause. Elle looked straight at them. Her voice didn't waver. "Yes." The gray-haired woman's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Explain." Elle took a slow breath. "The principal, Grant Walker, physically assaulted me in front of the entire staff during a meeting," she said. "Additionally, there are patterns of intimidation, verbal harassment, and mismanagement of school funds and programs." Silence only, the faint hum of the overhead lights. The younger woman clicked her pen once sharply. "You have evidence." Elle nodded. "Witnesses, recordings, documentation of discrepancies in financial reports." The tall man tapped his clipboard thoughtfully. "And why didn't you report this earlier?" Elle held his gaze. "I was instructed to observe and gather quietly." A heavy pause. The gray-haired woman's expression shifted, no longer skeptical, but sharply attentive. "You're not just an intern, are you, Ms. Hart?" she said quietly. Ella allowed herself the faintest of smiles. "No, ma'am." The room tensed, like a cord pulled taut, ready to snap. The younger woman leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Authorization code." Elle answered without hesitation, reciting a series of numbers and phrases that only an internal agent would know. The tall man closed his folder with a snap. "Understood." The gray-haired woman rose from her seat, smoothing her blazer. "Continue cooperating as planned." "We'll handle the exposure," she said. "Mr. Walker won't see it coming." Elle stood nodding once as she turned to leave. The tall man added, "Ms. Hart, good work." She allowed herself one brief breath of steadiness, before stepping back into the hallway where Grant waited, arms folded, jaw tight, suspicion burning in his eyes. Ella walked back into the auditorium, her steps even calm. Grant was waiting. He pushed off the wall as she entered, face twisted in a forced smile. "Everything all right, Miss Hart?" His voice carried a warning thinly veiled under mock concern. Elle met his gaze without flinching. "Perfectly fine." Grant's smile tightened. "Good. I wouldn't want any misunderstandings tarnishing the school's reputation." Across the room, the district officials gathered near the stage, murmuring among themselves. Their eyes darted between Elle and Grant. The gray-haired woman stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Walker," she said crisply, "we'll proceed with staff statements, starting with Ms. Hart." Grant's jaw flexed. "Sure," he said smoothly, though I doubt an intern would have much insight. The officials didn't respond to the bait. Elle stepped up facing the small panel. Her heart pounded, but her voice came out clear. "In my time here," she began, "I've witnessed physical intimidation, verbal harassment, and deliberate misuse of school funds by Principal Grant Walker." A heavy silence fell. Grant's face darkened. He took a step closer. "That's a serious accusation," he snapped. "From someone who's barely been here 2 weeks." Elle stood her ground. "Serious actions deserve serious consequences." Mason, standing off to the side, muttered, "Ungrateful little." The gray-haired woman silenced him with a glance. Grant barked a laugh, short and ugly. "You're just a kid. You think anyone's going to believe you over me." Elle didn't blink. "They won't have to believe me. I have proof." The officials exchanged quick looks. The tension crackled like electricity in the air. Grant stepped even closer, voice low and dangerous. "Careful, girl," he hissed. "You're playing with fire." Elle didn't move. Maybe it's time someone burned down the lies. Grant opened his mouth, fury spilling into his expression, but the gray-haired woman raised a hand sharply. "Enough," she said. Her tone brokered no argument. She turned to Elle. "Please submit all evidence immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation." Then she faced Grant. "In the meantime, you're relieved of all duties pending inquiry." The words hit like a gunshot. Grant's face went from red to gray in seconds. "You can't do this," he sputtered. "I built this damn place." "Exactly," the tall inspector said coolly, "and you'll answer for what you built." Grant looked around wildly, but no one moved to defend him. Not Mason, not Linda, not Jade, only silence thick final. Elle finally allowed herself a breath. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield had just shifted in her favor. The gray-haired woman flipped through her clipboard once more, then looked up sharply. "Ms. Hart," she said, voice carrying across the silent auditorium. Or should I say, Agent Hart. The room jolted like someone had fired a gun. Grant's head snapped toward Elle so fast his neck cracked. Mason muttered, "What the hell?" Linda dropped her pen with a loud clatter. Elle didn't smile. She simply stood taller, the weight of pretense finally gone. Effective 3 months ago, the woman continued crisply. Agent Hart was assigned by the Department of Education's Internal Affairs Unit to investigate misconduct at this institution. Grant staggered back a step. His face drained of color. You set us up," he choked out. Elle turned toward him fully now, her voice calm, precise. "I was sent here because of multiple anonymous complaints about you, your leadership and systemic abuse inside this school." The gray-haired woman stepped forward, and given today's findings, she said coldly, those complaints were justified. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed. The entire faculty sat, frozen eyes darting wildly, struggling to piece together what had just happened. Jade covered her mouth with both hands. Chris stared blankly at the floor. Mason shook his head in disbelief, muttering curses under his breath. Grant broke the silence first. "You can't do this," he barked, voice cracking. "She's lying. She's just some kid pretending to." "Enough," the tall inspector said sharply. stepping between him and Elle. "You are hereby suspended pending a full investigation," he said. "Any attempt to interfere will result in immediate criminal charges." Grant's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You—" He jabbed a trembling finger at Elle. "You won't get away with this." Elle didn't flinch. "I'm not the one trying to get away with anything." The younger official approached, handing Grant a thick envelope. Notice of suspension. "Please vacate the premises immediately." Grant tore open the envelope with shaking hands, scanned the first few lines, then let it fall to the ground. He turned to the assembled teachers, desperate. "You're just gonna sit there," he shouted, "after everything I did for this place. For you, silence." No one stood up. No one moved to defend him. They just stared, wide-eyed hollow, some shrinking in their seats like children afraid of a storm. Grant let out a strangled, broken laugh. He backed away toward the exit, still shaking his head. "You're all cowards," he spat. "Every damn one of you." And then he was gone. The doors swung shut behind him with a heavy, echoing thud. Elle stood still for a moment longer, feeling the tension drain slowly from the room, like air from a punctured balloon. This wasn't the end. Not yet, but it was a damn good start. For a long moment after Grant stormed out, no one in the auditorium moved. The inspectors spoke quietly among themselves, thick folders exchanging hands. Some teachers slumped back in their seats, heads in their hands, others stared straight ahead, faces blank with shock. Elle stood there silent. She watched it all with a calm she hadn't felt in weeks. The tall inspector turned to the group. "We'll be contacting each of you individually," he said. "Cooperation is strongly advised." No one dared argue. By noon, the school buzzed like a disturbed beehive. District officials roamed the halls, pulling teachers aside one by one. Classrooms sat half empty. Students whispered nervously by their lockers. Mason was seen arguing with an inspector near the gym. His voice rose, cracked, then fell into desperate murmuring. Linda spent an entire hour locked in the staff bathroom, sobbing behind a stall door. Jade simply packed up her things and left without a word. And Grant. By 3 p.m., his nameplate had been stripped from the office door. Custodians boxed up his belongings in silence. The fall had been swift, brutal final. Ella walked the hallways one last time. No fanfare, no announcement, just quiet steps, echoing against the lockers. She paused outside her old classroom, the place she had taught, listened, fought to be seen. Inside, a few students sat waiting, confusion and worry etched across their young faces. She stepped in, offering a soft smile. "Miss Hart," one boy whispered. "Are you leaving?" Elle nodded. "Will you come back?" another girl asked, voice small. Elle crouched down, meeting their eyes levelly. "You don't need me to come back," she said gently. "You have everything you need already." She pressed a folded letter into the hands of the homeroom teacher, one of the few who had stayed neutral through the chaos. "For them," Elle said simply. The teacher nodded, eyes glassy. Elle rose, gave the kids one last smile, and turned away without looking back. Later that afternoon, the letter was read aloud to the students. It was short, clear, and unforgettable. Respect is not about fear. It's about seeing others truly seeing them, even when the world tells you not to. One day you'll stand where you least expect, and the way you treated others will be the measure of who you are. Choose kindness. Choose courage. Elle Hart. Weeks later, change rippled through the school, new leadership, new policies, mandatory ethics training for all staff. But the real shift wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the way students and teachers looked at each other a little more carefully, a little more human. And sometimes when walking past the old homeroom, someone would pause. Someone would remember, not the scandal, not the shame, but the woman who stood alone and changed everything,